So, welcome. We're going to be talking about learning to see and read energy today, which is a topic close to our hearts and probably the one we're maybe, Cody, I guess, most proficient at, and we've spent much of our adult lives doing. And we want to see if we could demystify it as much as possible, walk you through some of the mechanics and steps, and do a meditation and help you learn how to see or read energy. And some of you maybe have taken our classes before, know some tools, and have had some of this practice. And perhaps some of you haven't, and this is your first rodeo. Um, and I think it is one of the coolest topics. When I started to learn how to see energy, it just opened up so many dimensions and really shifted the way I saw the world and interacted with my own energy. So we'd love to walk you through some of that journey today. Before we jump in, quick announcement. One, me and Cody are taking a group to India. If you want to come to the
Yeah.
Himalayas in September, that's right. I can't wait to see Cody in his Buddhist monk form. I'm going to shave that head of yours. That would be freaking awesome. Put a robe on
That
you,
would
shave
not be. If you shave yours, maybe.
it. I did that for a long time. And then, second announcement, we're going to be teaching a once a month learning to see and read energy class starting April 22nd. It's not up yet on the website. We'll share it with the replay of this class. So, details coming soon if you want to get really deep into this topic. So, one of the things, Cody, me and you've been doing for a long time, you longer than me, but we've been teaching intuitive training together for, I don't know,
Been a
8, 10
while.
years at
10
this
years.
point.
Yeah.
Yeah. We don't do it every year. We do it once every couple of years, or we have other teachers in the academy teach it. But when we teach intuitive training, which is we meet every week, sometimes twice a week, and learn meditation tools, how to ground and run energy, how to have boundaries, a lot of really cool energy tools that help us set the foundation so that we can learn how to see and read energy in a healthy, clear way. And so, intuitive training is the long form program that I did when I lived in Hawaii. Cody, you did it when you were growing up in California.
Yeah.
Really hones in the skill of seeing energy. And we live in a world where we live in a very intellectual world where most people, when they go to look for an answer, they're just thinking, or they're thinking, how can I solve this problem, this equation in my head? And we weigh the pros and cons, we ask for advice, we ask ChatGPT all the ways, but the one thing most of us have a hard time doing is closing our eyes and looking at something and having insight and seeing it clearly. And that's the power of meditation. And then taking a meditation a step further of learning how to see. So maybe Cody,
And
how do you
read energy.
and read?
Yeah.
Yeah, how do you describe it when you start teaching new students what it means to see and read energy?
Yeah. I think, we have to kind of start from maybe a foundational idea of recognizing that everything is energy and what is energy, that energy's all around us, and that recognizing that most of us are very sensitive to energy. So we're already experiencing it, and reading it is taking it from that experience, which for many of us, it's a felt thing. Like I feel energy, I feel the pressure of an energy. I feel it in maybe a lot of different ways. Like it changes how I feel in relationship to something. So I'll get an energy uh, kind of impression from it or some energy coming at me, and then it's all in the body. So moving from feeling energy to starting to see energy is starting to move up into the third eye and starting to maybe change our perspective a little bit from the experience of it, the impact of it, where we're the effect of it. For those of us that are really sensitive, that can really affect us out in the world, to starting to look and observe, like, what does this energy look like to me? And there's that place where we start to see it. And then to me, seeing it and reading it is kind of two different things. Like I can start to see it, and then to read it, I have to take this next step of kind of asking a question, asking, well, is this mine or someone else's? What's the vibration of this say to me? What's the impression? What color is it? So starting to read energy, in my mind, once we get to the point to be able to open up and see it, is starting to ask some questions and get some insight about it.
And at the very beginning of that journey, what usually happens is doubt, which is,
Lots of doubt.
yeah, am I seeing what I'm seeing? Am I
Is this
imagining
real?
it?
Yeah.
Is this
Am I
real?
making it up? Am I imagining it?
Am
And
I doing what my teacher said? Just taking, seeing what
right.
they think I should see?
Yeah. And that's I think that's a great thing that we process through as we start to have some tools to work with and we start to interact with energy more. Early on, I had an experience. So one of the tools we use is the image of a rose. It's a real spiritual symbol, and we'll just set it at the edge of our energy space to help define it, to help kind of remind ourselves to be aware of energy. And so I was doing just that. I would put it out there, but I was like, well, I'm just doing what my teacher said. And my teacher said, yeah, you have a rose there. And one thing that really kind of made me take a step in realizing that this world of energy is much more real than what we might think at the intellectual level is I did that. I had a rose up there and I encountered a young child that just pointed right at it and said, look, isn't it beautiful? Like she saw it. And to have that happen in the world suddenly challenged all of that doubt. And that's one of the ways that we all get through the doubt and the invalidation is that we start to get into a place where we can practice with it and we'll start to see things or you get an insight and then it gets validated. It plays out later and you go, oh, I saw that. Like I had just looked at that. But that's part of the process. We just have to go through that. I don't know of anybody that can just open up to seeing and then have confidence and certainty and clarity and without going through the process of really learning, practicing. Yeah. It's
Yeah.
just like martial arts. You learn a
Just
move
like that.
and you try to reproduce it and it takes hundreds of iterations before you start to get confidence and kind of precision and accuracy with it.
So I've taught this, you've taught this thousand times, and so we know what the journey looks like. We've been through it, and we teach students, so we know what the journey looks like, and it almost always looks like this. We we ask the student to close your eyes to take a look at something, ask a question, take a look, and all of these energies arise: distraction, fear, confusion, doubt, overthinking. Can I see? Right? All of these energies arise, and immediately we think that's a problem. Like, oh, okay, I can't see, I'm not good at this. Maybe it just isn't for me. But really, that is the work to be done. It's like if you were to go to the gym with a trainer and say, hey, I can't lift this weight. It's too heavy, so I'm going to quit. No, that's exactly why we're here. So if you close your eyes to look at something in meditation and you're having a hard time seeing, that should be more information and validation to you that this is what you need to work on. And could you imagine yourself being in a place where you do close your eyes and you do derive insight and answers consistently, and it really enriches who you are in your life and your decision making process? So maybe there's a big decision and you sit down and you meditate on it. And instead of it taking you hundreds of hours to have a teeny weeny insight, maybe it takes a few hours or a few weeks or days, whatever it is. And it is a mechanic that you can get better at, And you really can learn to see your insights and answers more clearly. Do you ever become all knowing and perfect at it? No, that is not a possibility in any area of human experience. But can you get good at it and consistent and be grounded with it? You can. You actually can. And most people, they don't believe that when you get started. But when you, for example, you close your eyes and you go to look at something in meditation and you see distraction, overthinking. Okay, well, that's something that's probably always happening to you. But if you use the meditation tools and you sit still and you let some of that energy clear, it might actually help reveal part of your answer. And so we learn in meditation how to work with all of those energies instead of making them enemies. They're just part of the journey of making the third eye, which is in atrophy for most people, stronger. Right? It's this muscle. Let's call. I don't know if it's a muscle, but whatever it is, this third eye behind our two eyes. When we close our physical eyes, we have this one inner eye we can see our interior subjective world with. It's an atrophy for most people. And so it takes time to build that muscle and to see clearly. And it it could be a hard journey for those of you who are overthinkers and there's a lot of noise, but imagine yourself on the other side of it, which is the coolest part. Like I can close my eyes, I can see inward, right? So I could see into myself. And then the other part of that journey later on in training, we learn to look into somebody else's interior subjective world and see their energy. And that's really cool as well. And then, as an energy worker, you might help guide somebody else. And as you get better at seeing someone else, you get better at seeing yourself, and vice versa. As you get better at seeing yourself, it becomes easier to see other people clearly. And Cody, I know maybe you could say something about this, but when a lot of people, when they go to first see energy, what happens is they start to interpret and they filter the images that they see through something intellectual. How
Right.
do you help
Uh,
how do you help students work through that?
yeah. So, well, some of that is in the practice. Certainly, we have ideas about being mindful of that. But some of it is that we just naturally have a part of us that might want to problem solve or fix it. And so if we fall into that part, then that's what the interpretation becomes. We kind of tell the story or the advice to fix it, where seeing energy and reading is really just illuminating. So I oftentimes put it in the sense that being a reader is not about being prescriptive, but being descriptive with what you're seeing. So I'm not going to tell you what to do. I'm going to illuminate what's there if I'm reading someone else. And
And
the
validate.
just
Yeah.
and that validates them. And the interesting thing, a lot of times in a reading, I'm not necessarily guiding someone to something. I'm just illuminating what's already there and validating that. And it internally for that person or for me, if I'm getting a reading, there's a part of me that recognizes it. And I kind of already knew it, but it was in the background. So a lot of times when you get a reading, you're getting kind of validated for something you already kind of knew in the background, but just had dismissed it, or an ability that you kind of always knew you had, but you were afraid to bring it forth. So you kind of validate parts of a person through seeing that lets them open up and take a step. But from the reader side, starting to see and distinguish, what am I seeing versus what energy is there that I'm experiencing. Like you mentioned a moment ago, if you sit down to look and you experience doubt or you experience anxiety or whatever it is, and you say, I can't do this, that really what's happening is you're encountering the energy that's already there. So say you have a problem you're wanting to get an insight about, and you sit down to look at it in meditation, the first thing you're going to encounter is what's already been going on with you with that problem. which is you've already been mulling it over, thinking about it, worrying about it. And that's the first energy to release and get through before you then get to an answer. And that's no different with reading another person. You sit down to read another person, and the first thing you're going to encounter is all the energy around what you're looking at, say, as a question. And we learn how to process and release those first energies. So seeing energy and reading isn't always about taking the first hit of an answer. It's not the knee-jerk reaction. It's learning to release energy and process through until that deeper, and I don't even know if deeper is the right word, just the clearer insight emerges in terms of what it is. And it
There's,
takes a little
yeah,
patience with ourselves to release those energies and process through them.
and there's also a kind of spiritual validation that I experienced early on,
Hmm.
where we all could be validated for our minds, for our bodies, like for karate masters like Cody. But it's rare to get really validated and seen as a spiritual being. And I remember early on that I had never had that before. And when I felt like I was seen clearly, that was pretty amazing to get that hello, that something in me shifted, that I was more than just this body. It's really hard to describe because it's a world dimension. I don't know what you want to call it. That's not physical, and yet it exists. And so we had it's hard to package it and describe it, which is probably why a lot of energy workers, readers, healers, spiritual people, when they talk about these things, it's always very vague because we're pointing at a world that's not physical in form. So it doesn't have a specific color, shape, or form. And so maybe, being an artist, it gets us closer to describing the truth than
Yeah.
sometimes than being a scientist in this world. Um, but when we get validated as a spiritual beings, in my personal experience, and then working with other people, there's something in us that starts to awaken, and there's almost like a piece of the puzzle that's been missing that seems to land and round us out as beings. So, for example, we've got our five senses to see, feel, taste, touch the world, hear the world, right? But there's something missing in that. And so when we learn how to feel energy, to see, to know, right, we have these other senses and abilities. When they start to awaken, it's very validating and fulfilling. And it's almost like in the background, you knew there was more, but you didn't know how to get to it. And now, that you do, there's just a much bigger world that you can tap into of energy and information to inform who you are, your decisions. And for me, that was very, very impactful when I started down that path. The the part of the downside of that is there's so much lack of structure in this world, right? Me and Cody were laughing about this earlier. Spirituality has become so popular and everywhere now, and the barrier of entry is so low. You could become a coach or a healer in about 15 minutes. And so our 15-minute certification program, that it's warped it. And it's yeah, it's just there's nothing in life in my experience that doesn't take a good 10,000 hours to get, and this included. So we were just discussing that earlier today, me and Cody. So there's this foundation of tools that we teach: how to ground yourself and run energy, how to clear your head of noise and external inputs so you can see clearly, how to learn how to see and know and not interpret, right? These are all kind of steps on the path to learning to read and see energy clearly. And they take time to develop, right? So when you close your eyes to meditate, if there's just pain and noise, you're going to have to put some time and energy in to working on that so you can then see clearly. And the journey, in my opinion, is very much worth the energy. and the effort. And I'll just share one story. And I really don't like sharing these stories because then it sounds like magic, and then people reach out and they want a session, which I'm not going to give them. Call Cody. Uh, but I remember I was sitting early on as a student and doing one-on-one sessions, energy work sessions I would do hundreds and hundreds of them. That's what I spent all day and night doing for 7 years in Hawaii. And I remember sitting with one student and saying, "Hey, I'm looking at your creativity space. So we can look at somebody's energy in layers, the way you might think of chakras. You could look at layers like their physical well-being, emotional well-being, their heart space. We could look at a lot of different layers of a person. And at this moment, I was looking at her expression of creativity in the world. That was the layer of energy we were reading. And I said to her, I was like, Cody, I said, I see an image. Sometimes we see an energy just like a color, or we just get a knowingness. But this was a very clear image of puppies before their eyes open, which at the time I didn't know. I actually didn't know that puppies' eyes didn't open when they were born, that it takes time. But that was the picture I saw. And I said, I see this picture floating around you in this space of puppies before their eyes open. I'm not going to interpret it. I don't know what it means yet. I'm just saying what I see. And she goes, "Wow, that is crazy. I literally just wrote a magazine article called Puppies Before Their Eyes Open." And I just published it, right? And so it was that energy and that image was floating in her field, I guess you could say. And I didn't tell her anything she didn't know. All I did was validate that creativity and that image in her and helped her realize how real that energy was. And that was I ended up doing that thousands of times. So for me, it was like, no, at a certain point, it's not a big deal anymore. But in that moment, it was a really cool validation for me as a reader and for her just being seen. And you could also just do that for yourself, but it is cool to give somebody else that kind of hello. And I know, Cody, you've done it many more times than I have.
Yeah, they kind of blur together.
Yeah, all your experiences blur together.
Of
In
reading, yeah. Um, but where you started with this, I had have a similar experience of being seen, where you're seen at the spirit or energy level and validated. There's something to that. It feels very different, and it opens up a world. And one of the things about exploring energy awareness and starting to be able to see energy that really shifted things for me was realizing there's so much more going on than what we see and experience through the five senses. There's this whole other dynamic that's happening that actually governs much of the world and the experience of the world. And reading, whether we're doing it in meditation and we're just connecting with energy and looking, or we're reading someone else, it it's like we step into that world. And like you say, it's such a different world. There's not a real definitive language even for it. So a lot of times as a reader, um, you're struggling to kind of communicate what you're seeing, to put it into proper words, because it is very much like the artist who, in their mind's eye, sees the painting, but then when they paint it, it's never quite as good on the canvas, because what you're seeing in spirit is like the pure version, and what comes out in the world is subject to, the rules of matter or language or thought. And the thing about the energy awareness, or the energy world, is in many ways it goes beyond thought. In some ways, it's pre-thought. It's what's existing already just before we give it life. And you start to learn how to look into that world and get insight from that. And that's a really big shift in the experience of being in the world to me.
And it could be a very practical tool as well. Really, really practical. Um, Sometimes too practical. I remember when I was running the center in Hawaii, somebody called and said, "Hey, can you open a safe for me?"
Right.
I was like, "No, if I could open a safe, I wouldn't do it for you."
Yeah.
By the way, for those of you who are here live, feel free to pop questions in the chat um, for the next few minutes before we get into meditation. So, any question on this topic that you have, feel free to pop it in the chat. So, me and Cody were also discussing earlier today when we were preparing. What's very popular now is remote viewing, which is this form of intuitive ability of they call it like you find a target and then you describe it. And it was used by the military for many, many decades. And I was saying to Cody, you'll find so much more content out there in the world about remote viewing than you will about using these abilities in a safe way that validate your spirituality. Uh, and it's like, oh, it's just another tool for me to derive information and for me to get what I want. And that is not how we approach it as teachers and uh, being on this spiritual path. It is about awakening to your energy and how it could help facilitate that process. So you can take anything in life and make it a tool or a weapon, or use it to fulfill some gain that you want to get out of the world. But then are you actually growing is the question. Is it deepening you as a person? And if it's not, then I would back off. And so there is this thing going on out there in the world in a sense
Yeah.
of weaponizing these
I
kinds of abilities.
yeah, I love the how the language around that is like militarized. Like find a
Military.
target, execute.
I had
And
I had someone call me once. This was back when we had landlines, when I was at the physical center, and say, "Hey, I want you to spy on my son's boss." And I was like, "And I want you to order me a large pepperoni pizza." Like, get the hell out of here. Not spying on anything ever for anyone. All right. There are guardrails here. Um, I once was doing a session for someone and I asked her, "Hey, I hate to ask you this, but are you here because you think your husband's cheating on you?" And she was like, "Yes, that's why I'm here. I want to know." And so I sat back. By the way, when we do a session or we're reading energy, we are on nobody's side. I'm on no one. I am committed to the truth, and that's it. I'm here to create some kind of story where you're the hero and someone's the villain, or vice versa. So I'm sitting there quietly. I'm just like contemplating what she's upset about and looking. And then I said, "Wait a minute. Are you cheating on your husband?" And she was like, "Yeah." But who
she wanted
cares
to know
about
if he
that?
was cheating. Yeah. Yeah. You don't want to get wrapped up in that, tangled
And
up in
then
that mess.
Cody, it went further. She wanted to know if her boyfriend was
Was
cheating on
cheating.
her.
Yeah.
And I had to explain, hey, this is not what this school is for. This is not what I do or what we do. This is about growing and awakening to our abilities, not deriving information about somebody or just getting what we want. So get the hell out of here.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's much more about uh, connecting with this part of yourself, aligning with it, and then starting to get what you need for growth. Not what you
Yeah.
maybe think you want. So much of we've been, I think we've been sold this kind of commercialized picture that there's so many things we want that sometimes we can't hear that deeper sense. Like in our Kundalini class, we just talked about the fourth chakra, where you would the heart center where you would really deeply connect in with getting what you need to be fulfilled, what you need to grow, what you need to take the next step. And ultimately, that will get you where you want to or need to be on your path. But this is a different way of approaching that. It doesn't negate
I,
any of the other
yeah.
ways we use. It just adds more information, more connection with ourselves moving forward. So there's this aspect of it that really enhances one's growth or opens a doorway to levels of growth that you might not be able to access only through this connection with energy and spirit.
And when we do a session, or when I used to do sessions, there's the person that sits in front of you. Sometimes it's a dominantly an ego consciousness centered person, which means they're identified with their story of life, and they think they know what kind of information they want to get from you and derive, right? And so there's this ego sits in front of you and it's like, fix my life, give me what I want. And as a reader, we actually were talking to the person's, let's call it higher self or their soul, and, and asking that part of them, what does this person need? And what they think they want and need might be different than what they actually want and need. And so, as a reader, you have to be nuanced in your ability to communicate to the deepest part of the person and validate them on that spiritual level. Like, this is actually your journey and what you're here for. It's not to maybe accumulate wealth or fame or whatever you think you're sitting in front of me for. I actually am not going to validate your ego. I'm going to tell you what I see that's your higher self is showing me that you need to hear. But also, as a reader, you gauge that. Like, I'm not just like fire hosing somebody with what I think they should hear. There's a nuance there, just like a psychologist or therapist, right? Of how much they can have, how much they can. So maybe I say 10% because I can see that's how much they can receive at the moment. But as a reader, you're kind of doing a few jobs at once, which is one, you're reading the energy, but two, how can you communicate it in a way that the person can receive it and it could land? And I'll just tell a very brief story of I had a guy come to me one time and he shows up. This was like over a decade ago, so it's fine. Shows up late in his sweatpants, just like, "What's up, dude?" Yeah, kind of, I don't give a fuck vibes. And I went to close my eyes and like, man, this is tough. This is tough going. Sometimes the energy is thick as lard. And so eventually I just stopped and I opened my eyes and I said, "Hey, dude, why are you here? What is it that you want from this session?" And he just got to give him credit. Very clear. He said, "I want to be famous." And I said, "Okay, I got it." So it was just his ego coming to see me, and it was like, "Give me what I want." And when I told him I couldn't give him what he wanted, he shut down. And he's like, he wasn't actually interested in being read or being seen. He he's just wanted what he wanted. And once in a while, that's the case. It doesn't happen too often where there's like almost no room to communicate with somebody. And I find those experiences almost amusing. It's like,
Yeah.
wow, because like, look at that. That exists too. That's
Yeah.
fine.
And there's
Yeah.
nothing wrong with wanting something. It's
Yeah.
just when we're looking at the energy aspect of it, we're looking at someone as a spirit. That's a different level of information that's deeper than that in many
Yeah.
ways. So,
Quick
you know,
question.
a
Oh,
quick
go ahead.
story because you've
Sure.
told a couple of stories about people who wanted you to look at something and you said, well, that's not what we do here. I one day had someone call into the center I was running, and they wanted me to find they had like a grandparent had died, and there was something they were looking for that was valuable that they knew was somewhere, in the house. And so I did look at it, and I said, well, it's in the bedroom, and I see it here. And then they called me back later and said, I found it.
It
So
was
I did
there.
that.
Oh man. You never want to share those stories because then your
I
phone
know.
rings off the hook.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's hit and miss with finding stuff. So yeah, don't call me to find anything.
Oh man. When you read, you have no control over what you'll see. So, and we're not omniscient, which means we're not all knowing. Uh, when I read energy, I see what I see and I don't see what I don't see. And sometimes I see the energy that's keeping me from seeing the next energy, like there's some stuckness or pain or resistance. And that's what you see. That's what you're seeing. And that's fine. It's not always the ultimate answer that you might be looking for. That might be 10 or 10,000 steps away of peeling back layers of energy. So when somebody comes in with a big question like, how come I can't find the love of my life or my career is stuck or whatever it is, there might be many layers to that we read and work through together until the deeper answer can emerge versus like, no, just tell me what happens at the end. I want that now. Like, yeah, we all want that, but that's skipping the thing we call life and
Yeah.
experience and growth. So go find somebody else. I'm in the business of helping you grow, experience life, and awaken, not in just giving you what you want. That's a different game.
And sometimes when we read, we do get an answer that maybe goes to something bigger, or broader in their life. Usually when that happens, what then happens is it's a couple years later I hear back from someone who says, well, that reading was great. It didn't quite make sense, but now it makes sense. Like it took a couple of years for them to get through all the steps that actually came up in the reading. Um, but in the more immediate sense, very often, like you're saying, some energy gets illuminated that helps the person take the next step, get unstuck and get in motion towards that bigger thing.
Yeah.
It's not always one step to the bigger thing. It is getting the energy moving, getting past a block, and then you start to move towards that bigger thing.
And you might even be able to read, well, how not necessarily how many steps, but how much energy is here. And
Yeah,
that's a good thing to be able to see for yourself. Okay, is this a molehill or is this a Mount Everest? And if it's a Mount Everest, how much can I bite off at a time? Okay, this much. I can do that. And now we're on a path. Now we have
right.
some clarity. This is the journey I need to be on. I was working with a student once who had just been divorced. Um, and I said, we got a lot of work to do around you shifting and separating from your ex partner here and healing. And she was like, really? Oh, I thought I was done. I was like, well, you've been divorced for about 2 weeks and there's a lot of energy here. And about a year later, she was like, man, were you right? I'm still working through these layers. So there's the assessing of how much energy there is, and then there's the working through it. Somebody just asked, we have a few questions, but what do you say is the hardest thing for a student to learn? Well, maybe we can keep it in context of learning to see energy. What is, because that's otherwise too big of a question. But what is the hardest thing around learning to see energy? I think would be a pretty relevant question.
One of the
And
hardest things
go
is not
ahead.
to
Yeah.
take it on. Is that when you open up to start to see, it's very easy to start to take on responsibility for what you see, or it's a problem that has to be solved, or something that should be healed, versus just being neutral, observing, and just seeing it. And that sometimes can be a challenge to not take it on. We're so used to just taking things on. And,
Yeah, the other thing is feeling instead of seeing. So in the
right.
beginning of our trainings, this is the case over 90% of the time. A student can feel, and they'll even say, I feel when they describe things. And they have a hard time kind of taking the elevator up to this mind's eye and learning to see images, see colors, seeing. That tends to be one of the
That's a
hardest shifts
challenge.
to
Yeah.
make. Yeah. Uh, and
Because
then
it
the
really is
other,
about learning
okay.
to recenter into the mind's eye and start to access the information from there.
Yeah.
Um, and even that notion of taking it on, where that often happens is in the feeling side of us. So I feel it and absorb it. And when I learn to see, I have to shift out of that and just be able to kind of learn to see it and just let it be. So that's where we have like a concept of neutrality. just
The-
observing it and letting it be.
yeah, the other really hard part is not interpreting because we want the full story or we want to build a narrative instead of saying, I see a purple blob, right? I see a gray cloud. I see some heaviness, and that's it. Fine. I don't know what it is, why it is, where it's coming from. That's how you become a good reader, is only being true with what you see and notice and not adding any color to it. And that is really hard for people because we spend all day creating narratives and stories around everything we experience. And learning how to be a good reader is not doing that. And that's a hard place to just stop. This is all I see and nothing else. Sit back and be still and then watch it unfold. So that is part of the process. And we're going to go into meditation here in a moment, and I'll walk you through some of it. Someone was also asking, how about like a childhood memory, maybe wrapped in shame, and you're just thinking about it over and over? And what would you do with something like that? Well, thinking about something over and over is different than reading the energy, right? That's why it's not shifting, because you're not reading the energy, you're just spinning around a thought again and again. So if you were to read the energy, you might freeze frame the thought or the image that comes with the thought in front of you and then start to look at it, which is what we'll do in meditation today. Let me see.
Oh, and we do tend to, and we have tools of ways to process through those kinds of energies that are stuck in a loop.
Yeah.
And starting to see the energy is really the first step, because then you start to actually process through the energy side of it and work through what's in a way you start to unpack the energy side of it.
We got a couple more questions. We'll try to go through quickly, but one is, Cody, do you ever encounter spirits that have passed?
I'm not sure if I understand that.
Like died, people who've died.
Oh, that have passed. I thought you said that have a past, and I'm like, well,
Oh.
don't everybody have a past? Yes, yes, we do, and certainly I work very deeply with that in the sense that the other group I teach is much more advanced training is mediumship, and so we learn how to interact with spirits like that. But even from the seeing side, when I read someone, one of the things that might show up in the reading is someone who's passed that might be standing there next to the person. It's not uncommon.
Yeah. Um, let's do just one more question. Do you have any tips on reading the Akashic records? Cody, give them special access. He has a special access pass.
Yes, you'll have to come to our website to get the special access pass. It's a gold ticket.
Yeah, it's like miles for, airlines. You gotta build up to it. Well, I think there's, yeah, sure, Akashic records you can think of. We'll just do this very briefly, like a library, like now we have, Google Drive, a cloud of information. You can think
Yeah.
of the Akashic records as information that's not in the body, that's kind of stored in spiritual traditions. Many of them, it'll have the records of your past lives and what you've learned and information you've gained, journeys you've been through, that if it was all in your physical body, you wouldn't be able to function. You kind of would just be overwhelmed. And so it is kind of like uploading information that you don't need at the moment. But that being said, why is getting information from there more important or relevant than getting information from here? So, like sometimes that it could be too sexy of a term. I think what's really important is to learn how to see energy here, what's in front of you. That's way down the line. It's sometimes a lot like people who like, I want to channel aliens or some huge entity because it has all this great information. I'm going to bring in Archangel Michael or the Andromeda Galaxy beings or something. And I find most of that not helpful because why is that information bigger, better, or more true than what you have inside yourself? And every single spiritual teacher that we revere, the Buddha or Jesus or Lao Tzu or anybody, they found the truth inside themselves and then they expressed it into the world. So bringing information in from the outside, okay, but I think it's not as deep and relevant as finding it inside yourself.
Yeah.
Um,
No,
we
very
could
true.
do a
I
whole
mean,
class on
that
that.
is where we work. It's finding your answers and your information within yourself and learning to see. The great thing about that is you can look at anything. So you don't have to bring so you could once you kind of learn to see and get activated in that part of yourself and it's open, you could look at the Akashic records. You could look at a being from somewhere else and get information that way. So it's not like you're having to bring it into you. That I think that's the beauty of seeing and reading energy is you can look at anything.
Yeah, it's similar to reading cards or astrology or anything where you're looking for the information outside, right, yourself, and you want to bring it in. And what we're really teaching is just how to use this ability and to see from the inside out. It's a much more empowering way to do it. And I can't tell you how many Reiki healers and card readers and all people use all sorts of tools I've worked with who are like the one thing they just can't do is to see themselves. They have to channel something. They have to ask their guru. They have to do an astrology thing. They will do everything except close their eyes and learn to see themselves because it's the hardest thing, but in my opinion, the most rewarding and safest way to do this kind of work and has the best long-term effects. So if you're going around to this every which way, what is you know, you're always looking at somebody else to predict the future for you. That's really popular on YouTube. Tell me what's coming, give me the energetic weather of the month or whatever it is
Right.
versus
The forecast.
the forecast versus like, well, what do you see and know? Otherwise, you're not really growing. You're just trying to avoid the traffic cones as you move through life based on somebody else's information. So, that's how we try to practice it and teach it. Is that the same for people who work with a, a council of beings that they're channeling? Yeah, same thing. Listen, none of it's bad, but why is their information or insight better than yours or more relevant? Right? So we want to develop from the inside out. And then if we do get information from the outside in, we're so deep in our own knowingness that we're not programmed by it or we don't make our life decisions based on somebody else's information. It's just informative, but we stay in our center. So when I work with people that are very easily swayed, I have to be very careful with what I say because I don't want them making their life decisions based on what I say. I want them grounded in their own truth. And so that is where the work is, and it's hard. And that's what people don't want to do. They want to pay somebody, get the answer, and move on. And that is a perfect recipe for disaster. I digress.
That's
Now
your
we're going to
forecast.
meditate. That is my
Disaster.
forecast. It's going
Yeah,
to be
because
a,
when you start to see, you start to be able to tell the difference between the truth and we might say the lie, although it's kind of a harsh way to say it, but between what is going to be true for you and what isn't. Doesn't mean the information doesn't have some credence, but if you're looking from within, then you start to know what's true for you and what isn't versus just taking it all in. So there's like this aspect of it where you start to be able to discern what aligns with and works with you and what doesn't. But
and
it
yeah.
really is when there's no way I don't think to look to those other things without giving some aspect of your power over to them. And when you start to learn to see, you're empowering yourself. You're bringing all of that ability within. And it's not that you still can't access other information. You'll just have more clarity about what it is, if it works for you, where it came from.
This is a hard lesson I had to learn going through my training, was just because something doesn't have a physical body doesn't make it more
Better.
enlightened than you. Doesn't
Yeah.
make it more enlightened than you. In fact, having a body and being in human form is the hardest thing. But being able to see from inside your body and get your own answers, to see in yourself and to look out at the world, is an incredible ability.